The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's webinar on the new financial disclosure system. My name is Mark. I'm calling from Sunrise Systems. I'll be your instructor, presenter today for the FDS system. Just a couple of things I want to go over today before we get started here. I've been showing a quick PowerPoint on the screen here. I hope everybody's been seeing it. We're going to kind of talk about how today's webinar is going to go. We will take up the full hour, probably a little bit longer based on the amount of questions that we have. But to start off, for the municipal clerks that are on today's presentation, you will be eligible for one CEU in records management. In order to obtain that CEU, throughout today's presentation, we're going to be given code words just to make sure that you have been on the webinar throughout the entire webinar. We will give one about 10 minutes into the webinar to allow other people to get connected to the webinar. We'll give one approximately halfway through, and then we'll give one towards the end. What we ask you to do is write down those code words because they're only given out one time at those different periods. And what you'll need to do is when you submit your form in to Dan Kaminsky at the DCA for credit for this webinar, you will need to include those three code words on that form. I do have with us, joining us today is Pat McNamara from the DCA. She will be on the call and she'll be helping me answer some of your questions as they come in. I cannot hear you directly. We will not have two-way communication. So any questions that you have, we're going to ask you to type in the little chat window in the little panel that opened up for the webinar. Down, I believe it's at the bottom. Just ask your questions there. We will stop at points in time to answer those questions. And at the end of today's webinar, we will stay on until every question is answered that you have. So that's where we're going to get started. So let me start off first with, like I said, I'm just going to kind of open up my screen here. So let's go to full screen view. And just to make sure that everybody can hear me, if a few people can just type yes down in the chat section, just so I know that everybody can see my screen, which right now says terms, and they can hear me, we will get started here. Okay, good. Okay, so I got a bunch of yeses, so I know people can hear me and they can see my screen.
And
If
Mark,
at any point in yes,
Mark, I'm sorry. Let's start. I'll just start with the first word so we can get at the beginning. And the
okay.
first, it specifies the time when he would add it.
Yeah, you could give him the first word. Well, we usually wait about 5 minutes in, so.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Yeah, I'll let you know when we'll give that first word.
Okay, fine.
That's fine. Thanks, Pat. One other thing I want to mention to you today, we are recording this webinar, and all the webinars that we've done, this is the 7th one that we've done so far, are going to be posted online. So if you want to go back as a refresher, you can review this webinar or any of the webinars that we've done previously. So again, those will be available for you online as well too. So that being said, let's get started here. If you do have any problems throughout today's webinar with hearing me through the audio or even seeing the screen, what I would recommend is that you hang up and redial in. Sometimes there's been a few people that had some issues, or maybe log off and log back into the webinar at that point in time if you do. But follow me here, and I think we'll have a good webinar for today. So let me do this. Let me get set up here. Okay, so on my screen right now, what I'm showing you is this is going to be our training summary for today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to log into the FDS system, the Financial Disclosure System, how you will create and maintain your LGO roster, how an LGO sets up an account within the system. So we're going to go through the process of how your LGO set up an account. And again, since the majority of our participants today on this call are municipal clerks, you as a municipal clerk have to file a financial disclosure statement as well too. So this will be a good exercise for you to see how to set up your account as well. How an LGO files an FDS, and then eventually how do you search for an FDS on the public website. Just so I know, we have different people on today's call, and some of the terms that I use today, everybody might not be accustomed to them. I do use 3-letter acronyms, which I have listed here. So if I refer to LGS, I'm talking about the Local Government Services or the DCA. If I talk about LGE, I'm talking about local government entities, so those are your municipalities, counties, colleges, GIFs, so on and so forth. If I talk about an LGO, I'm talking about the local government officials or officers. And if I talk about FDS, it means I'm talking about financial disclosure statements. So as I use those three-letter acronyms in today's webinar, you kind of know what they mean. So again, I just wanted to go over that real quick with you. That being said, I'm going to minimize that, and I'm going to be here at our login screen for the new financial disclosure system. So a couple of things I want to point out first about the new system is, number one, the system is a web-based system. It's a cloud system. So as long as you have a computer with internet access, you will be able, or your LGOs will be able to access the system. We do list on this home page or this login page down at the bottom, we do list system requirements for utilizing the system. So basically we ask that, you know, to access the system, you have either a Windows PC, an Apple Mac. Even though it's not listed there, I've even accessed the system through my iPad, so through a tablet, you'll be able to access the system as well. Also, too, since it is a web-based system, all the different browsers are supported. Your common browsers like Internet Explorer, Mozilla Firefox, Apple Safari, Google Chrome, all those different browsers will be supported with the system. We do ask you that in your browser settings that you enable pop-ups or allow cookies, just because there are times throughout the system that you will get a pop-up box with a form or a display. So we ask that you allow those pop-ups to occur within your browser. Either you turn them off or you add the URL to your trusted browser or pop-up settings. From software standpoint, there are certain times that we open up, especially the FDS form, as a PDF. So we ask that you have at least Adobe Acrobat Reader or some type of compatible PDF viewing software on your device or computer so you can actually view that form at some period of time. And then from a resolution standpoint, that's the minimum resolution that you should have on your computer to get the best view of the system without having to scroll back and forth, you know, so much throughout the system. So again, from a system requirements standpoint, you know, that's what we ask you to utilize for system requirements. So a couple of things. I'm going to be working in our test system today. So one of the questions that comes up is, that I know will come up is, when is the system going to go live? We are working on some final changes on the system as we speak. We're hoping that maybe as early as this week, if not the latest next week, that the system, we have a go-live date. So again, we don't have an official date as of yet. That being said, I know one of the other questions that will come up is, you know, since we're fast approaching April 30th, which has traditionally been the deadline for filing financial disclosure statements, what is the new deadline? Well, as of today, the new deadline happens to be May 15th. We do anticipate that deadline changing based on the go-live date, but as of right now, the official deadline has been extended to May 15th at this point in time. So again, you know, we will, or the DCA will be communicating with you as the system goes live what those dates are. Also, too, you will be receiving from the DCA, once the system goes live, you will be receiving your username, login name, which will be your email address that the DCA has obtained from GovConnect website or system. So they're going to be sending out that email address along with a temporary password to you, to that email address that was registered with GovConnect. So that's how you're going to be obtaining your information and communication as we move forward. So that being said, coming back to the login screen here, before I actually log into the system, I do want to just point out one thing here on the login page. In the lower right-hand corner, there's a link here that says Forgot Password. I do know that as people start using new systems, there is a tendency, especially when you go in and change your temporary password to a permanent password, you might forget what you changed that password to. You can always come here and click on the Forgot Password link. And what it's going to ask you to do, it's going to ask you to put in your login name, which ultimately will be your email address. So if I just type in my email address here, and I click on the button that says Get Password, what I should get is I should get a message that my password has been sent to me successfully. But in this case, I got a little message in red that tells me that the given ID, email ID, is not registered in the system. So if your email address is not registered within the system, you're not going to get a password. So if you get this message that comes up in red on the screen, it means the email address that you use to get your password is not registered on the system. You're not going to be able to get a password. You have to use the valid email address that's going to be provided to you from the DCA. If I come back and I correct my email address and I hit get password again, then what will happen is I'll get a message right up here that says password is emailed to and then my email address. So that tells me that that password has been sent successfully to that email address. So as long as I don't get a message in red down here that tells me that the email address is not correct, then you need to check your email and you should see your password within your email. Once you have that, again, then you can actually log into the system. So at this point in time, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to have Pat give the first keyword out, and I'm just going to check my question pane right here just to make sure that the questions here, there's no questions right now. So Pat, if you want to give out that first keyword.
Yes, the first keyword would be spring. Spring as in the season spring.
Very good. Okay, so if everybody got that, so today's first keyword is spring. Okay, so let's go down here. I'm just going through the questions. Okay, for the people, for a couple of questions that came in, for the people that are having a hard time hearing me, what I would suggest is just hang up your phone and just redial in at that point in time. And if you're having a problem viewing the screen, I should be on the login screen right now. Let me just check to make sure that's the screen that everybody sees. Yep. You should see a login screen. So at this point in time, if you're having a problem actually viewing my screen, what I would suggest you do is stay on the phone, but maybe restart your session and try to log back in and see if that helps. Okay, so let's continue on here. I'm going to actually log into the system. Now today, for today's training purposes, I'm going to be utilizing two townships. I'm going to be utilizing Edison Township. It happens to be my hometown as one of the test townships that I'm using. The second one will be South Brunswick Township. So I'm going to show you how we manage our rosters within both of these townships for one LGL. So I'm going to actually log into Edison Township right now under my account. Okay, I'll put in my username and my password. I'll click on login, and the system will take me into the home screen of the FDS system. Now, a couple of things I just want to point out to you on this home screen here is that in the upper right-hand corner, when you first log into the system, what you should see right up here is you should see your name come up in the upper right-hand corner. So it lets you know that it's your account that you're logged in under. Right underneath that, what you'll see is you'll actually see your organization's name. So in this case, I'm logged in as Edison Township, County of Middlesex, so you should see organization name there. And then right below that, you will see a logout link. Now, there are a couple of ways to log out of the system or be logged out of the system. One is I can just click on the login, logout button right there, and the system will be logged out for me. I can also, since this is a web-based system, I can also click on the red X and close my browser. That will log me off as well, too. If your browser, you do something a little bit different, if you go over to, maybe file, exit, that's fine as well, too. As long as you close that browser, it will log you off. And then the last way that you can be logged off the system is that if you're logged into the system and for a period of time there has been no activity, for security reasons, the system's going to log you off automatically. At that point in time, what you'll have to do is you'll just have to log back in. So again, if you were logged into the system, let's say you went to lunch, you came back, later on in the day and you try to start working on the system, it might take you back to the login screen and log you off automatically. At that point in time, just put in your username and password and just log back in. A couple other things I want to point out here on this home page. We do have a status bar up at the top here. The first thing you'll see is the submission year for what we're in. Right now it's 2014. As we move into next year and subsequent years, the DCA will be responsible for flipping over to the new year. So whatever year you see listed as the submission year, those are the, when your LGO goes to file an FDS, that's the year they're currently filing. So usually right around the new year, that year will switch over and we'll go into the new year at that point in time. You will also see the middle stat here tells you LGO rosters, how many people are on your roster. Okay, so how many LGOs have you set up on your roster? In this case, I have 12 individuals on my roster. And out of those 12 individuals on my roster, how many have filed financial disclosure statements? Well, out of my 12, 11 have filed those financial disclosure statements. So again, quickly, I can see quick stats when I first log into the system. Down below, you're going to have some links. You're going to have one that says Manage LGO Roster, and we're going to come in there in a few minutes to actually set up and manage our roster. You're going to have a reports link where you can go in and run certain reports that we'll have for you within the system. And then the last item here is Edit Local Government Entity Profile. And this is the link we're going to ask you to come into when you first log into the system. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when your username and passwords are sent to you, the password that you're going to be given will be a temporary password. What we recommend that you do is when you first log into the system with that temporary password, you come into the Edit Profile screen and you update your password to something that's more user-friendly for you to remember, okay? But the other thing that we ask you to do is when you come into this profile screen is just look at the other fields just to make sure that the information that's been set up for your organization is correct. There will be some fields that you can update and change. There are going to be other fields that you cannot change. But again, what we do is we ask you to, especially up at the top section up here, is just make sure your information is correct. Now, to change your password, the way you will do that is in the bottom section down at the bottom of the screen, the last two fields say password and confirm password. What I'm going to ask you to do is clear out those fields. So just put your cursor in those fields and clear out whatever in those fields. And then at this point in time, enter in your new password that you want, your user-friendly password, okay? So if I come in here and I enter that in, I'll enter it in password field. I'll put it in the confirm password field. And then what you need to do is you need to click on the Save button at the bottom of the screen. And, oh, look, I got a pop-up message that tells me that the password must be between 8 and 16 characters in length and must contain at least one letter and one number in that password. So, again, your passwords will need to be between 8 and 16 characters in length and contain at least one letter and one number in that password. So let me go back here and let me update my password. And then I'm going to click Save again. And then now I should get a message up at the top of the screen and also at the bottom in green that tells me that my operation has been successful. So one of the things that you will see throughout the system as you're utilizing the system is that any time you click on Save or you do an operation that's successful within the system, you will get a message usually at the top or the bottom of the screen in green letting you know that that operation has been successful. But let's say you tried to do an operation that didn't work or was unsuccessful. Well, let's say I took a 0 off my phone number here, so it's not a valid phone number right now, and I click on Save, well, then I'm going to get a message in red that tells me that what the error is and that it wasn't successful. At that point in time, I just need to correct what the error message is giving me. In this case, I'm going to put the 0 back in on my phone number. I will click on Save. And then what I should get now is I should get a message in green that reads that that operation was successful, which it was. So once I corrected that phone number, now I was able to save that phone number and that information within the screen. A couple other things that I want to point out here as well, too. Any fields that we utilize throughout the system that have a red asterisk next to them are required fields. Okay, so you'll have to have something in that field before you're able to actually save that information within the system. So again, if a required field is missing information, it's not going to allow you to save, and you will get a red message that lets you know that, or which field is not, filled in correctly. So again, that's how we come in here, and that's how you would update your password. I'm going to click on the Home button in the upper left-hand corner, take us back out to our home screen. And now we're going to actually go in and we're going to start to manage the roster. So before I actually go in there and show you how to create and manage your rosters, I'm going to just take a look at our questions real quick. One of the questions says, how will we receive our temporary password? As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the DTA will be sending those usernames and passwords to the individuals, mainly the municipal clerks, but they're going to get the information from the GovConnect website or system. Okay, so Whatever information they have available to them in that system is where we're going to send the information to. The next question, when will we receive the login and password? That should be within the next week. We're anticipating the system to go live within the next 7 days or so. Just prior to the system going live, you should be receiving that username and that temporary password at that point in time. So it says here you are probably not going to launch until May 1st, but we'll have a due date of May 15th. Most likely that due date is going to change. Like I said, as of today, the due date is May 15th. We were anticipating the system to be live several weeks ago, but with some last-minute changes that we've been making to the system, it's actually delayed the system from going live. But like I said, once the system goes live, that due date for the financial disclosure submission will be reevaluated, and a new date will probably be set at that time and communicated to you and the LGOs. It says, we have a member that does not use computers. Can we do the form online for them, or is there a printout form? There is no more printout form. Everything has to be done online, and we'll talk about if you should fill out their form for them a little bit later on when we actually come up to the filling out the form and so on and so forth. So Jamie, just bear with us for a little while until we get to the form creation and submission. Can you have multiple users accessing the system, i.e. clerk and deputy clerk? The answer is yes. You can have multiple users utilizing the system at the same time and working on creating the roster. However, for this year, we're only going to be sending one username and password to access the system. So there's only going to be one admin username and password to access the system. You can share that username and password with the individuals who are going to be managing your rosters. We are talking about for next year having multiple usernames set up so you can manage the system. But for this year, it's just going to be the one username and password to manage the system. But yes, you can have multiple people in the system at the same time adding to the roster and managing the roster. It says, I will be inputting the rosters, but I am not the clerk. Can you change the email address so everything comes to me instead of the clerk? Unfortunately, the DCA will be sending that information directly to the clerk. What we would recommend is that once the clerk receives that username and that temporary password, that you change that temporary password to something that is more acceptable to both of you. Maybe not the clerk's normal password. You come up with a, your own password that you will utilize for that account. So again, right now that information is going to be sent directly to the clerks. That's how the initial rollout is going to go. Like I said, for next year, we are thinking about expanding, having multiple users be set up to manage the rosters and so on and so forth. So at that point in time, we'll look at setting up, the deputy clerks and the other individuals who are managing the rosters at that time. Okay, so those are the questions I have up to this point. So let's go in and let's talk about the roster. Okay, so in the past, you typically would submit your roster to the DCA after, or at the end, kind of after your financial disclosures were filed, your LGO filed your financial disclosure. With the new system, the roster has to be done first. The LGOs will not be able to submit a financial disclosure statement unless they appear on your roster. So you're going to have to create these rosters, and what we're going to ask is that as soon as the system goes live, that these rosters are created within a very quick and timely manner, because the LGOs will not be able to file their financial disclosure statements unless they appear on your roster. And in order to do that, you're going to have to give them information from the setup on the roster in order for them to set up their account. And you'll see that as we go through in a second. So let's go in and let's look at the roster. I'm going to click on Manage LGO Roster. Now, since I've been using this account for the 7 or 8 training sessions that we've already done previously, you'll notice that I have individuals on my roster already. Okay, so my roster is not a new roster. When you first log into the system for the first time, this screen down, especially down at the bottom under the search results section, all down here is going to be blank because nobody's going to be on your roster. Okay, so that leads me into another question. Questions that we've gotten is, well, what about the rosters I submitted last year? Is that information going to be migrated into the new system? The answer is no. The reason for that is the data was looked at from the previous rosters, and it was determined that really the information wasn't really good to actually migrate into the system. There were some inaccuracies. It wasn't, some organizations, it wasn't truly valid. So we said, going with the new system, we're going to want you to create your rosters from scratch this year, starting with the new system. Now, we do realize that for the first year, it's going to be the bulk of the work for creating a roster. I know there's organizations out there that the rosters are relatively small, maybe 30 or 40 individuals. And then we have, large cities, counties, and so on and so forth that will have, several hundred people on the roster. The good news is that once your roster is created for this year, in next year and subsequent years, that roster is just going to be copied over to the following years. And at that point in time, all you need to do is just add any new individuals that need to be added to the roster, and then disable any individuals that no longer are part of your organization or don't need to file an FDS for your organization. So again, the management on subsequent years is going to be a lot less than what you're going to do for the first year. So we do know that the bulk of the work is going to be the first year, but going into subsequent years, again, that's going to be just really more maintenance work instead of actually having to create this whole roster year after year. A couple of things I want to point out. Since I already have a roster created, up at the top, the first thing that we give you is the ability to actually search to see if a member's on your roster or if you want to pull up that member. And you can search a couple of different ways. You can search by their last name, you can search by their first name, you can search by their login name, and so on and so forth. And you can also do parcel searches. So if I came in here, right, and I typed in, let's say I wanted to look for the last name Williams. I wanted to see everybody whose last name was Williams, and I clicked on search. Well, there I come up with two individuals that have the last name Williams. I have Michael Williams and I have Stephen Williams. So again, I can quickly go in there, type a last name, hit search, and then everybody with the last name Williams will come up. I can also do parcel searches. If I wanted to see, let's say, everybody's first name that starts with an M, okay, so I put M there and do search. Well, we had two individuals that came up. We had myself, Mark Semple. We also had Michael Williams that came up as well, too, because both of those individuals, their first name started with M. And you can do that in the last name field as well, too. I mean, I can search by just the letter of the last name. If I do S and hit search, okay, there we have several individuals that come up, three individuals. We have Robert Smith, we have John Smith, and we have Mark Semple, right? So we have three individuals that have a last name that starts with S. So again, I just wanted to point that out to you, as you go through the system, that you can actually do a quick search if your roster is very large. You don't have to actually scan through the entire roster. You can actually go in and just type a name and pull up that individual. Once you do your search, down at the bottom, you'll get a search grid. These are your search results, okay? And what you'll see is you'll see different columns starting with last name, first name, board/agency, title, login name, PIN number, has the FDS been filed, yes or no, are they active, and then an edit column, so if you have to edit any individuals. Now, one of the good things about our search grid is that if you click on any of these column headings, that column or the grid will actually be sorted by alphabetical or in ascending order or descending order. So if I click on first name, okay, column heading, the system, the first click is going to actually sort that column in ascending order. So now you see Elizabeth, Gary, James, John, Mark, Michael, so on and so forth. If I click on it a second time, it'll put it in descending order, okay? So you'll see Susan, Stephen, Samuel, so on and so forth. So it goes in descending order. And I can do that with any of the column headings. If I click on board/agency, then we get a list of all our boards and agencies in alphabetical order. If I want to do title, okay, I can click on title, and I get all our different titles in alphabetical order. So again, any of these column headings that I click on will put that column in, the first click is in ascending order, the second click is descending order, okay? So I just kind of wanted to show you, that as we go along. The other thing I want to show you, the two columns, is the PIN number column, and we're going to explain that in a few seconds when we set up our first LGO, or we set up an additional LGO in the system, and then the FDS file column. So basically, as soon as an LGO files a financial disclosure statement, this information will be updated immediately within the system. So you can always kind of see who has filed within your organization, what LGOs filed and what haven't. Now, if I wanted to see everybody that hasn't filed, I can click on FDS filed. I'll do it twice, and I'll bring up all the no's up at the top of the list, right? So I can quickly see what FDSs haven't been filed for what positions by just quickly, clicking on that FDS column and so on and so forth. The edit button will allow me to go in and edit a LGO that I've already set up within the system, and I'll come back to that in a few seconds as well too after we set up our LGO. So again, just wanted to go through and kind of show you the search feature and the search grid and the options that you have there. So let's talk about adding an LGO to the system. How do we do that? Well, on this screen, we have a button right at the bottom. It says Add LGO. I'm going to click on that, and what that's going to do is that's going to take me into my setup screen for that LGO. It's broken up into a couple of sections. The top section is where we're going to enter in their first name, their last name, middle name possibly, it's not required, okay? And then the system is going to generate a PIN number for them. The first name, the last name, and the PIN number will be the information that you need to relay to your LGO because they're going to need that information to get set up within the system. So let me set up my LGO here. I'm going to say today's LGO, her name is Susan Smith. Okay, so I'm going to put in her first name, her last name. If she has a middle name or a middle initial and I know it, I can put it in. If I have multiple, let's say, Susan Smiths within my organization, then I would want to put in a middle name or a middle initial so I could distinguish who's who within the system. The other thing that I want to point out, too, is that for first name, one of the recommendations that we make is that you use the person's full legal name, okay, first name. Meaning that, let's say Susan normally goes by Sue, okay? Now, you could put in Sue and she can register as an LGO under Sue, but again, when people go to search later on, especially the public, they actually might search Susan and not Sue or vice versa. So, you know, what we recommend, again, it's a recommendation, you don't have to do it, but, you know, we say, you know, try to use the legal first name if possible. So I'm going to use Susan for right now. And I'm going to show you a little bit later on when we log into another township and set up Susan, I'm going to use Sue at that point in time. I'm going to see that, yes, it really doesn't matter, but again, from a search standpoint later on, it might matter. Okay, so now once I put in her first name, her last name, I'm not going to put a middle name. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to click the Save button here. And what's going to happen is the system's going to generate a PIN number for me, okay? So we have this PIN number 41138, okay, as you can see right here. This PIN number is now going to be Susan Smith's PIN number for my entire organization. So all the different positions I set up Susan for within Edison Township, she's going to have that same PIN number and utilize that PIN number when she does her registration, okay? At this point in time, then, once I get that PIN number, then I will move into the next section, which says Add LGO Position. And this is where I'm going to add the various positions that Susan holds within my organization. So the first one I'm going to pick, I'm going to say Susan happens to be a council person, right? I'm going to say she's on the governing body. Okay. And let's say she's a council person. Okay. And then we do have a place here that you can actually put in their effective term date, their from and to effective term date. Now, if you do enter anything in these fields, that effective to date will actually appear on their financial disclosure statement for that term. It isn't a required field, so if you do not have the information readily available, you don't have to enter it in. But like I said, if you do, we recommend that you put that information in. But at a minimum, what I need is I need a category, I need a board/agency, and I need the position held within the organization. Once I enter that information in there, I'm going to click on the Save button. Now, you'll notice down at the bottom section here where it says List of Positions, right now it says No Positions Held, right? Because we haven't, this is a new LGO we're adding to the roster. Once I click on Save, which I'm going to do right now, now you'll notice that that position has been added to the list of positions at the bottom. So it says elected official, governing body, and council person. Now, let's say Susan has another position within my organization. Well, all I need to do is come back up to the Add LGO Position section. I'll come down here, and I'll say that she's on the planning board as well. And she's just a member on that planning board. Okay, again, no effective term date. I'll click on Save. And now that position is added down below as well, too. So again, you can add as many positions to Susan within the system where she has to file an SDS. So again, add all your positions there, and once you're done with Susan. Now, at this point in time, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the three pieces of information that you're going to need to give Susan for her to register will be her first name, her last name, and her PIN number. We have provided a print function at the bottom of the screen here where you can actually print out a screenshot of this. If you click on print, you'll get the printer dialog box that comes up. Just send it to whatever printer is attached to your computer, and you can print out this sheet with her information, and you can hand it to her so she knows what to register. You can also email this information to your LGO as well, too. So, again, you need the first name, the last name, and the PIN number. If you want to email it or you want to tell them in person, that's up to you. However, you're going to have to get that information to that person or that LGO some way, somehow. So, again, that's what you can do. A couple other things here. You'll notice back now at the top of the screen, I now have a couple of buttons. I have one that says Add New LGO. So now if I wanted to go on to my next LGO and add my next person into the system, I would just click on Add New LGO. And we also have a button that says Delete LGO. Now, for the Delete button, a couple of things come into play. If this LGO has not filed a financial disclosure statement yet, you will be able to delete them off your roster. But once they file an FDS for your organization or their position within your organization, that delete button will go away. You will no longer be able to delete them off your roster. Now, let's say going into subsequent years that Susan Smith is no longer a council person, she's no longer on the planning board. Well, at that point in time, we'll make her inactive on your roster, and we'll do that by clicking on the disabled button over here. That effectively makes her inactive on your roster. So as we go into the next year, we can mark her as being inactive if she no longer holds a council position or a member of the planning board at that time. If later on after that she's appointed to another board or she's elected to another term, then you can always come in here and uncheck that, make her active again, and then add her new position at that point in time. So again, those are some of the things that you could do within the screen. So once I'm done adding Susan to the system, okay, I can, like I said, I can click on Add New LGO. It'll clear out this screen, and now I can go in and I can add my next person to the system. Or I can click on the back button, and this will take me back out to my roster. And now if I look at my roster, if we go down here, you'll see where I'm highlighting. We now show Susan Smith 2 times in my roster because she was added to 2 different positions, one as a council person and one as a member, okay? You'll see that her PIN number stays the same, 41138. So again, no matter how many different positions she has within the organization, her PIN number will stay the same. And then where it says FDS filed here, it says no because she hasn't filed an FDS yet, okay? You'll also notice that the login name section here is blank as well too. You will not be responsible for, obtaining the login name, which ultimately is going to be the user's email address. Once this LGO, once Susan registers in the system, we will update this column for you automatically just so you know what their login name is. So again, if they come to you, next year and say, well, I forgot what my login name is to get into the system or what I use, again, you can tell them, you can log in here and you can actually say this is the login name that you use to access the system. So again, that's how you would come in here and, see that information. So again, that's kind of adding the LGO to the system. I'll click on the home button, take me back out to my home screen. And now if I look at my roster, okay, before it said 12, okay, now it says 13 because we've now added a new person to our roster. We've added Susan. It doesn't matter how many positions Susan has. This LGO roster number here is the number of unique individuals you have on your roster. So again, that's how you go in. That's how you manage your LGO roster. That's how you add an individual. If you wanted to come in later on, you wanted to update somebody, let's say I had, let me pick somebody that has one position here, like John Smith, right? He just has one position as a council person. But let's say John was appointed to the planning board as well, too. Well, I can click on the edit button here. I can pull up his account, right? We see he just has the one position here. And then if I wanted to add him, to the planning board as well, too, I can do that. And I can also say he's a member. Right? I'll hit on save. Okay. Now his position has been saved successfully. We see it at the bottom as well, too. And if I go back to my roster, okay, and we look for him right here, John Smith, okay, what we'll notice here, okay, is that he's been now added as a planning board member as well, too, okay. Still no FDS filed, but he has been added to the system as well, too. So again, just wanted to show you how you would go in and add positions to people who might get appointed mid-year or next year, they have a new position that they have to file for, how you go in and you actually add that to the system. So at that point in time, I'm going to pause to take some questions or look at the question board, because there's probably quite a few. And then I will have Pat, if she's still on the line, give the second code word at this point in time.
All right, the next code word is PANDA. PANDA.
Very good. So PANDA, P-A-N-D-A. That's your second code word that you will utilize. Okay, so questions. There are quite a few questions here, so let's kind of go through them before we move on. First question says, once we create the roster, is it the individual's responsibility to log in and do their own FDS, or does the clerk do it? It is technically the LGO's responsibility to do their FDS. I do know, unfortunately, we don't have Chris Boz on the call today. He spent most of the time with me on the call previously, the sessions we did. But his response typically is that there's no official, policy that you can't do the FDS, but if an FDS gets filed for an LGO and you've done that FDS for that LGO and something is wrong with that FDS and there's an ethics complaint filed, who's the LGO going to point to when, they say, well, who filled out your form? They're going to point back to you. So it is recommended that the LGOs complete their own financial disclosure statement. Now, that being said, I know one of the questions that always comes up is, well, we have older individuals who aren't used to using a computer or doing things online and so on and so forth. Well, the response to that would be, have them seek out a family member, whether it's a son, a daughter, grandson, granddaughter, so on and so forth. Or worst case scenario, you can have them, sit in your office and you can kind of direct them, but you basically take on that role. If you fill out that FDS, you kind of become responsible. And I don't know if you as an individual want to be, hauled in on an ethics complaint if the LGO, goes back and says, well, I didn't fill it out, it was so-and-so that filled it out. So just bear that in mind, that when you do it, it's not recommended that you fill it out. It's really recommended that the LGOs, complete their own FDS on their own. Okay, next question. Must members of multiple agencies, municipalities file separately? Okay, so we're going to set up this LGO in another organization, but to answer the question, if an LGO is required to file an FDS for multiple organizations that they're associated with, okay, it's up to that LGO to obtain the name and PIN number of how they were registered within each organization. So, let's say I'm a council person in Medicine, I'm the tax assessor in South Brunswick, which we're going to set up in a few seconds, and I'm also on some type of board or commission for the county, and I'm associated with 3 different organizations. Well, ultimately, I'm going to get 3 different PIN numbers, one from each organization. What I'm going to be able to do as an LGO is I'm going to be able to take those 3 PIN numbers and register them all under one account. And theoretically, if I have all those PIN numbers at the same time, when I go to file my FDS, I will only have to file one FDS. It will cover all of those different PIN numbers. And as we go into creating an LGO account and filing FDS, I'll explain a little bit more of some of the things that LGO should and shouldn't do when they're doing their filing. So give me a few more minutes, and some of that will come. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Next question, can you reset the ascending or descending back to default? The answer is yes. So if you actually hit the clear button up at the top of the screen, let me come back in here. If I'm in the roster and I click on any of these columns to sort it, ascending, descending, vice versa, if I just hit the clear button up at the top of the screen, it basically refreshes the screen back to the default. So yes, the answer is yes. Just by hitting clear, it will actually put the screen back to the original default as when you first came in. Next question, can multiple LGEs within the municipality have their respective agency? Can multiple LGEs within the municipality have their respective agency? I'm not sure. Can you rephrase that question? Who asked that question? A backbar. I apologize if I'm messing up your first name there, but if you could just rephrase that question, I don't really understand it. Oh, actually, here's continued. To be responsible for creating rosters for their own agency, i.e. school boards, utilities, authority, so on and so forth. Okay, so maybe to answer that question, what I think you might have been asking is, if you're a municipal clerk, you will be responsible. One of the responsibilities you will have is, besides the LGOs within the municipality that you're in, if there's any municipal utility authorities within your municipality, you will be responsible for adding them to your roster as well too. If it's a school boards, I believe, are totally separate. They will have their own username and password to add to the rosters, but I know municipal utilities will fall under the municipality to set up and manage that roster as well too.
Mark, this is Chris.
Oh, hey, Chris.
School boards don't file with us.
Oh, they don't? Okay.
They're subject to the school ethics law.
Okay, fine. Okay, good to know. Okay. Next question. Do governing body members, elected officials, need to file more than once? Dwayne, it depends on how they get their PIN numbers. If it's, let's say, your organization, okay, so let's take your municipality. If you had set up Susan Smith as, just say, a council person today, okay, and she filed her FDS today, but let's say a month from now, she's now appointed to the planning board, well, she's going to have to file another FDS within 30 days of being appointed to that planning board, because that original FDS did not take into account her planning board position. Now, let's take the next scenario. If Susan Smith, as I mentioned earlier, is part of multiple organizations today, she should get her PIN number from all of those organizations now before filing that FDS, because if she does, she will only have to file that FDS once. But let's say she got the PIN number today for Edison Township and filed her FDS, and then 2 weeks from now, when we set her up in South Brunswick, she got her PIN number for South Brunswick 2 weeks from now, but she's already filed her FDS one time for Edison. She will have to file that a second time, because that South Brunswick position wasn't included in the first FDS filing. So she will have to refile that FDS as well too. But you'll see that when we go in to file our FDS, I think we've made the system a lot easier this year to file additional FDSs, since we retain the information that they utilized from the previous FDS. So bear with me a couple minutes and you'll see that. Next question. If a person holds one position with a town and another with a sewage authority, can they use the same PIN number, or do they have to have separate from each entity? Again, if the sewage authority is part of the municipality, it's a municipal sewage authority, then it's going to be the town's responsibility to set up the individuals on their roster for that municipal authority. But let's say it's a regional authority, like a county sewage authority or something, then that utility or whatever will have their own roster, and they'll get a separate PIN number from that roster at that point in time. So they'll have two individual PIN numbers. Next question. What if Susan Smith is no longer an elected official but still on the planning board? If you check disabled, does that allow you to choose what position is disabled? No, the disable button is actually disabling the entire account. If she is no longer a council person and she's just on the planning board, that's kind of where those terms come in. That's kind of where you're going to want to, maybe put in your term date. So let's say, she had a position only through 2014 as a council person, but next year she continues on with the planning board, then I would put in an ending term date for that council person position, so you know which positions don't apply on a go-forward basis, and you wouldn't disable her. That disable is basically for the entire account as of right now. Okay, next question. If the LGO holds two positions, then, for example, resigns from one, if you hit the disable button, how would you distinguish what position? Again, disable is to totally disable the entire account as a whole, okay? All positions. So, again, be very careful about disabling somebody as a whole. If they hold no more positions with your organization at all, then you would disable them. But if they're still have a position with your organization, then they still are an active person within there. Will we be provided with written instructions? Yes. Once the site goes live, there will be instructions on the website for you that you can refer back to. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you went on the call, these webinars are being recorded, and you'll be receiving a link to the recordings. You can always go back and review them. We also are in the process of creating a video for the LGOs, a short tutorial that they'll be able to run through as well to kind of see how to utilize the system. Okay, next question. Also, I'm going to request that you communicate that the time frame of the completion of the FDS needs to be at least a month from the time you roll this out. Currently, you plan to roll this out May 1st and expect the clerks will immediately create the roster and immediately communicate logins and passwords so that LGOs have time to respond by May 15th. That's a lot to ask. Michelle, as I mentioned, most likely that deadline is going to change. We don't have a date yet. I'm just telling you that the date as of right now is set at May 15th. That date was set in anticipation that the system would have already been live. So again, most likely that date's going to change. If the individual's board/agency is not listed or titled, can I create a new board, agency, and title? The answer is yes. For the board or agency name, one of the questions had come up is, well, why not provide us with a drop-down list of standard agencies and board names and so on and so forth? And kind of the reason is that, going from different organization to organization, everybody calls their boards and such different, okay? So we're going to let you manage how you want to call your boards or commissions or your agencies and so on within your organization. For example, I know in some organizations, in some municipalities, planning and zoning are combined as one, board. In others, they're separate. So again, you create it however it applies to your, specific organization. I mean, that usually is what's going to work best. Let's see here. MUAs are independent agencies. Why would the town clerk be responsible? Chris, you want to answer that?
Sure. One of the primary reasons is that we don't have a way to independently communicate with the municipal utilities authorities. There's no requirement that the utilities register with us through GovConnect or what have you. So the number one issue for us is a matter of communication. The other part of it is they're separate local authority. It's a separate local entity from the town in a sense, but it's still the board members are appointed. Commissioners are appointed by the governing body members. So the thought was a while back that the towns would have the responsibility for adding them to their own local government roster.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Okay, and I'm going to answer the next three questions, and then we're going to move on to setting up an LGO account because I know we're getting towards the end of the hour and don't want to run way over. Okay, how are these records retained within our municipal offices and subject to OPRA? Amanda, if you give me a little bit later on, we're going to talk about OPRA and what you're going to have to retain and not retain and so on and so forth. So give us a few seconds as we set up the LGO and file that FDS. I would like clarification on who needs to file the definition of an LGO. Our recreation committees, shade tree committees, subject to file. What we would recommend is there is documentation out there both at the DCA site, also on the municipal clerk site under the desk reference section of who needs to file and who doesn't need to file. What we recommend is that you go back to your roster from last year as a starting point and see who filed there. Also get in touch with your labor council and discuss it with them. They should know exactly who needs to file and who doesn't need to file within the organization. But there is publications out there that will actually let you know who has to file and who doesn't need to file.
Also, I just want to add that we're anticipating releasing the local finance notice tonight or tomorrow morning. It's very similar to prior years' local finance notices where there's a section that deals with the issue of who is or is not a local government officer. So there is some guidance in there. Off the top of my head, I do recall there being some guidance in there concerning recreation commissions versus recreation advisory committees, for example. But at the end of the day, it's a local responsibility to characterize their local government employees and officials in one group or one category or another.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Okay, So I've gone through all the questions that I was going to go through for right now. We'll come back to the questions a little bit later. So what I want to show you now is how do we, I'm going to log out, how do you file as an LGO, or how does an LGO set up an account and file their financial disclosure statement? So back on the login screen, in the lower left-hand corner, we have a link here that says New Registration, Local Government Officer. If we click on this link, what the system's going to do is it's going to ask us to go through a registration process. The first section it's going to ask us is it's going to ask us for our first name and our last name. But actually what I wanted to do, hold on, let me just come back in 1 second. I did want to set up Susan Smith in South Brunswick Township. I wanted to put her on the roster real quick, just so you can see when a person has multiple PIN numbers and how they would actually do that. So let me come in here and just add Susan Smith to my South Brunswick roster. Let's see that. Got PIN number 16311. I'm going to say she's manager. She's the tax assessor. So I'm going to set up Sue Smith as a tax assessor in South Brunswick. I'll click on Save. I have a PIN number for Susan here in South Brunswick, so it's a different PIN number than my PIN number in Edison. Okay, so I just want to quickly add her to this roster in South Brunswick, right? And I see her listed there. Good. Okay. Now let me log out and let me set up Sue as an LGO, right? Because she has to file a financial disclosure statement. So back on this screen here, she's going to take, Sue Smith is going to take that name and PIN number that was given to her either by Edison or by South Brunswick and register herself in the system. Now, one of the questions comes up is that if an LGO has multiple PIN numbers, which one do they have to register first? It doesn't matter, okay? They can register any of their PIN numbers first. Once they have their initial PIN number registered, then they can actually associate their other PIN numbers with their account once the first one is registered. So I'm going to do the PIN number that I got from Edison first. So I'm going to put in Susan Smith, okay? Actually, I'll just do SNU, okay? And the PIN number from Edison was 41138. And what I'm going to do is click on the Validate PIN number that I want to validate this, and it's going to tell me, oh, first name, last name, and PIN number do not match. Please verify and try again. This is because, remember what I said earlier about using legal first name? We actually set up Sue as Susan within Edison Township, not Sue. So it didn't find that exact match, right? But if I come in here and I put in Susan and I click on Validate PIN, then it tells me that the given PIN number has been validated successfully. Now I can continue with the registration. Now I can come in here and I can put in my other information. Right? So I'll put in my address, my phone number, and then down below, this is where Susan's going to actually create her username and her password. Now for username, we're utilizing email addresses as usernames within the system, or login names for the system, right? So here I'm just going to kind of just make up one that I use. Okay, I'm going to retype it again. And then I'm going to put a password in, just following the same guidelines as that you followed earlier when you changed your password. Okay, and then once I put in that information down below, there's some definition instructions about filing the FDS that we're going to ask the LGO to kind of read through. And then we're going to ask them to click on the checkbox that they've read the definitions and instructions and that they agree, and then click on the register button. And if everything's successful, they'll come to a screen that says you are registered successfully. We'll give them the option to actually print out this screen for their login information and retain it, so they could just hit print. But once their system, or once their username is created within the system, now they can actually come in here, they can click in the login button, and they can actually log into the system. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to put in my username, which is my email address, and I'm going to put in my password. Click in Login. Whoop, try that again. Okay, that's why. Sometimes, okay. Here we go. Good. And then I come to the home screen for the LGO. Screen looks a little bit similar to what you originally saw as an LG when you logged into the system. I see in the upper right-hand corner it has my name, Susan Smith, as a local government officer. I see the submission year is 2014. My FDS submission says submission pending because I haven't submitted anything yet, right? So it tells me submission pending. Then I have three different icons down here. One says File Financial Disclosure Statement, which we're going to come to in a few seconds, Manage Positions, and then Edit Profile. So same thing like you did before. They can actually click on Edit Profile, go in, update their information, change their password, and so on and so forth by clicking on the Edit Profile, just like you were able to do. But for right now, I want to come in here. The first thing I want to do is what we recommend for your LGOs is to go in and check Manage Positions. The reason for that is to see all the positions that they have associated with their account. Now here I see that I've only had 2 positions associated with, which were both for the Edison Township. Now I know I'm the tax assessor in South Brunswick, and I need to add that position as well too. So here I'm going to come in and put in the first and last name that was given to me by the clerk in South Brunswick, and that PIN number from South Brunswick, which is different from Edison. So this was 16311. I click on Validate PIN, and now that my PIN has been validated, you'll notice that that position has been added down below. So now these are the 3 positions that are now associated with my account. When I go to file my FDS now, okay, those 3 positions will be filed with that FDS. So I only have to file that FDS one time. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to want your LGOs, or your LGOs should know that they should wait to obtain all their different PIN numbers from the different organizations that they have to file for and associate it with them in the account before they actually file that FDS, okay? Because once they have all those PIN numbers associated, they only have to file that FDS one time. So let's go in and file the FDS now for my account. I'm going to click on File Financial Disclosure Statement. Now, we've broken this section of this FDS into basically 8 screens, and it basically follows the paper form, the different sections on the paper form, the 8 sections of the paper form. So as we come in here, you'll see that my name is listed, Susan Smith, right? It pulled over my home address here, and again, home address is optional. If I didn't want to report that, I can actually get rid of that, you know, and just clear it out, okay, which I'll do right now, so I'll just clear them out, okay? And you'll notice that some of the asterisks, we have like a green asterisk and a red. Now, I mentioned earlier the red asterisk is a required field, but the green asterisks are optional, okay? And then we also have a blue asterisk, you know, for, you know, spouse or civil partner information as well, too. Now, I do know as part of my FDS filing, I'm going to have to report some income, you know, for my wife, right? So, well, I'll say, we'll say John Smith, right? For my husband in this case, right? Because it's Sue Smith, right? We'll say her husband, John Smith, needs to report some information. We'll see at the bottom of the screen here, positions held. These are all the positions that will be included in this FDS filing. So I see all 3 positions, 2 for Edison and 1 for South Brunswick listed here. And at this point in time, I can now continue on to the next screen. Now, I can do 1 or 2 things here. I can click on the Save button at the bottom and save the information and update the information that I've done up to this point in time, or I can now click on the next button and take me to my next screen, which is screen number 2 of 8, okay? As you're going through these screens, one of the problems that people had with last year's system is that if they got to a screen and they didn't have all the information that they needed to fill in, they basically, if they got out of the old form, they would lose all that information. With the system this year is all the information that they've entered in and saved up to that point, they can always come back in later on and start right from the screen that they left off at, okay? So again, as we go through these screens, I'll kind of show you, you know, the information's being retained. So screen 2 asks me to list all sources of income that I have, you know, that exceed $2,000. So I'm going to say, okay, so source of income here is going to be, let's see, South Brunswick Township, because that's my full-time job, right, as a tax assessor. Okay, I'll just put in 1 Main Street. Okay, I'll say it defaults to self, right, because that's the income I'm reporting. Now, you'll notice down in the bottom section where it says listed entries, nothing's there listed, right? But as soon as I click on Save, my position is listed down below. I could put in other sources of income as well too, right? So I'll say FMG. And I'll say that's my spouse's source of income. Click on Save. And now that's listed below as well too. So I can list as many sources of income that I need to that exceed the $2,000 limit and just list all those sources of income. Once I'm done at that point in time, I can click on Next. Right? Now it'll take me to screen 3. Okay? At this point in time, it's going to ask me to list any fees or honorariums that exceed $250. Well, I don't have any, right? So I'm just going to go on to the next screen, right? But oh, look what happens when I click on Next. I get a message that says, to proceed, at least one entry should be added or select none. So in order to go to the next screen, you need to add at least one entry here or click on the none box, the check box here. So if I don't have any fees or honorariums in excess of $250, I could just click on none. Once I do that, I click on Next, and it takes me to my next screen, which is going to be screen 4, and this is going to actually list any gifts or reimbursement or prepaid expenses. Again, I don't have any, or Susan doesn't have any. We'll click none, proceed to the next screen. And then here it's going to ask me to list any interest held, right? So I'm going to say that that my husband has ownership in the McCutcheon Bagel Shop. Right, and I'll say that's my spouse, right? So I'll list that. Okay, so you'll see that listed below. Now I'll click on Next. I'll go to screen 6, which is now to list any real property that me or my spouse owns within, or dependent owns within the state of New Jersey, right? So I mentioned earlier, you know, my hometown happens to be Edison, right? So I'll come down here. I'll pick Edison. I'll put in my block and lot, okay? Now, one of the other problems with last year's system where people wanted to split percentages on property, the system, I believe, last year didn't allow that. Well, with this year, the system, you can actually do that. So I'm going to say for my block and lot, I own 50%, or Susan owns 50%, right? I'm going to hit Save. And then I'm going to say that my husband owns the other 50% here, right? So I'll come to Edison. I'll put in that block and lot again. I'll say ownership is 50%, but that's by the spouse. Click Save. And then down below in the list of properties, you'll notice that the same block and lot is listed, but it's 50% ownership by self and 50% ownership by the spouse. So again, you can actually do those percentage splits, you know, for any real property that's you know, owned within the state of New Jersey. Click on Next. This will take me to a comment screen, right? So I could just put in a quick comment here. Right, so I'll just put that in. Click on Next. And then what it'll do is it'll take me to the last screen, which is basically where I'm going to be able to actually submit this FDS form. Now, a couple of things I want to point out to you as we went through today's, you know, as we went through the FDS form and so on and so forth. We could have, at any point in time, we could have clicked on this button here that says Preview FDS Form, okay? And what that would have gave me the ability to do is if I click on that, that would open up a copy of the paper form in a PDF version, right? So I can always take a look at the information that I've entered in on that form, right? So we see the position, we see the sources of income, right? We see the real property I own, and so on and so forth. So at any point in time, I can actually click on Preview and always see how my form looks as I'm going through. But one of the things here on this screen is that before an individual, let's say that LGO didn't click on that preview form at all, okay? One of the things we do is down below here, you'll notice this is the button that you'll press to submit your financial disclosure statement. But right now it's grayed out. I cannot print, or I cannot click on that. And the reason for that is two reasons. One is we are going to force the LGO to preview their FDS form before submitting this application, okay? So we're going to force them to click on this button to at least preview that form. So even if they didn't previously preview it, we're going to force them to take a look at their form. And then the other thing we're going to force them to do, or ask them to do, is electronically sign this by typing in their name in this box here, right? So once they view the form, once they type in their name, now the Submit Financial Disclosure button becomes enabled, and now I'm going to be able to submit this form. And the way I would do that is I'm going to click on Submit Financial Disclosure. I'm going to get a warning box that comes up that says that you're about to submit this form today, and it's going to let you know, or going to let the LGO know that once this form has been submitted, they will not be able to amend it, supplement, modify, or change the form in any way. Okay, so once this form is submitted, the information that's on this form is submitted as is. They cannot change the form once it's submitted. So they're going to want to make sure, that's the reason why we force them to take a look at their form prior to submitting this, this application. So here, Susan, she's checked the form, she's double-checked it, triple-checked it, the whole thing. So I'm going to click on OK. I'm going to submit my form. And then what's going to happen up at the top here, we're going to get a message in green that tells me that my financial disclosure statement has been submitted successfully. It's going to give me a confirmation ID. It's going to give me a submission date and a submission time. Okay. Now, a couple questions come up. One is, I know with the previous system, the LGO was responsible for printing out a receipt at the end of the process and bringing that receipt along with their copy of their financial disclosure statement back to the organization, to the clerk, so they can keep a record of it. You will no longer have to do that. The LGO no longer has to submit a receipt to you. They no longer have to give you a paper copy of the FDS form. And the reason for that is because as soon as this financial disclosure statement is submitted, it is now viewable on the public search site for the public to go in and view. Okay? So again, I wanted to show you, again, how to do that. The other thing the LGO can do on this screen here is they can print out a copy of the of this confirmation if they want, and they can also print out a copy, click on view, they can also print out a copy for their own records of the FDS form. Once it is filed, we will put the date that it was filed and their name as they type it in on that screen. So again, they can print a copy of this. They can always come back in later on and print a copy as well too. But again, just wanted to, they can do it right here when they're on the screen. If I go out to my home screen, now what we'll see is under FDS submission, it says submit it. And what will happen is under file financial disclosure link, I cannot click on that link anymore because I've now submitted that form. So I can't make any changes to that form or whatever. Now, let's say 2 months from now, I get appointed to some board in whether it's Edison, whether it's South Brunswick, maybe it's at the county, maybe it's at Middlesex County. Well, once that position is added, that new position is added to whoever's roster, okay, I can come back in here that if it was for Edison or South Brunswick, that position will automatically be added to my list of positions, okay? But I will have a submission pending because for that new position, I have to refile or I have to file another financial disclosure statement for that new position because it wasn't included in the first financial disclosure filing. At that point in time, when that new position is added to my account, this File Financial Disclosure Statement button will become enabled, and I'll be able to file that FDS again for that new position. If that new position is with a brand new organization that wasn't listed here, well, then that position will get a PIN number. I'll just have to come in here, enter my first and last name and the PIN number that was supplied to me by that new organization, validate it, and now that will be listed down below here, and now I'll be able to go in and I'll be able to file for that new position. So again, that's how the LGO is going to go in and actually file their FDS. Last thing before I take the final questions and we wrap up here is there is going to be a public search site, which I just actually navigated to over on the screen right now. This is where you're going to be able to direct the public to go in and search for individuals' financial disclosure statement filings, okay? So, if you get, I know the question came up earlier about OPA requests and so on and so forth. You're not going to have copies of those financial disclosure forms anymore, okay? We don't recommend you getting a copy and keeping a copy. If somebody comes with an OPA request and they want to see the financial disclosure statement of an individual of your organization or multiple individuals of your organization, we're going to ask you to point them out to the public search site and let them search for that information on their own, okay? Because as I mentioned, as soon as that FDS gets filed, it is immediately available for public view, for the public. So there are a couple of ways that the public can actually search, and you could do the same thing as well too. I mean, you can have a link to the public search site as well too. If I wanted to search for Susan Smith's FDS, I could type in her last name, I can click on search, okay, and then what will happen is I don't get a result here. Why is that? Let's see here. What's going on? Let me refresh this, because we just refreshed the system or updated the system. So let me make sure I got the latest code. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I type in Smith, I hit search, and now the system brings up all different Smiths throughout the system, right? So obviously we see John Smith, Joe Smith, Robert Smith, John, again, Susan Smith, and so on and so forth, right? And then I could see the different entities listed here, okay? If I wanted to even make it a little bit more distinctive, if I knew I was looking for Susan Smith, right, I can just put her first initial. Oh, well, that brings up all S's. Let's go back here. Let's go back to Smith and Sue, or S, right? So that'll bring up all Smiths with the first name starting with S. And I see Susan Smith, and I see Sue Smith, right? So I see the three entities that she filed for. Now, if I want to view her FDS, all I need to do is click on the view button all the way to the right, and then what that'll do is that'll open up her financial disclosure statement that was filed, right? And I can view it, right? And now, since we know that Sue, all these were filed at the same time, they're all going to be exactly the same, right? So we can actually see, and we know what the submitted date was. You know, if Sue had a new position that she was appointed to a new board 2 months from now and filed another FDS at that time, well, obviously the date would be different, so we can actually look at that one as well, too, by clicking on the view button. We also know that you're going to have individuals that come in with open requests that say they want to view all the financial disclosure statements for everybody within your organization. Well, we give them that ability as well, too. I can come in here and I can type under local government entity, Edison Township, and hit search, and then every person on my roster that has filed an FDS will come up here in a list. Now, as a public person, I can come in here and click on view and view everybody's FDS individually, or what we do is we give the public the ability to actually download them all in one shot. What they would need to do is click on the check boxes on the left-hand side here, and I select it all, okay? And then down below we have this little CAPTCHA phrase that they would actually have to enter in. Let me find one that looks a little bit easier, okay? So let's see, A-E-C-B-Y, save, right? So if I enter in that phrase, okay, and I hit download, what will happen is then all these FDSs will be included in a PDF, right? And if I open or save that PDF to my computer, right, there's 22 pages here. This is everybody's FDS that I selected on that screen. So again, as the public, if I want to see everybody's FDS filings for a particular organization, I can actually select them all and download them and then view them at a later time. But again, this is where you would direct the public to go in and search and find somebody's FDS. You no longer have to keep a copy of that FDS form within your office, and you don't have to answer to that open request. That being said, we did have a question that came up last week where if a clerk goes in and downloads everybody's FDS, okay, and keeps an electronic copy on their computer within their organization, do they have to still answer that OPRA? In a sense, technically, yes, because you do have a record of that FDS. You're maintaining a copy of that record. My recommendation is don't download it. I mean, you can always come to this public site and view anybody's FDS if you need it, but point the public out here. I mean, it's just a lot easier. It takes less work off your plate. Having to manage one more open request. The last thing I just want to quickly show you is I'm going to log back into Edison Township, and I just want to show you that within Edison Township, if I go to my roster and I look for Susan Smith, let's just sort this in alphabetical order. Okay, if I look for Susan Smith, now you'll notice that in the FDS filed column, it now says yes, right? So immediately, once that FDS is filed, besides being available on the public site for viewing, we also update your roster to let you know that that FDS has been filed for that person. So again, you can always come into your roster and you can actually see who has and who hasn't filed their financial disclosure statement. Again, it's not your responsibility to make sure that the LGOs file their financial disclosure statement, but, you know, as a courtesy, if you do periodically review this and you see, you know, if I sort this by everybody that hasn't filed, and I just want to give a friendly reminder to my LGOs, especially if the deadline is approaching, you know, you can say, you know, Sam or Mike or John, listen, I noticed that your FDS hasn't been filed yet, just so you know, May 15th is coming, you know, I recommend that you know, file that before the deadline and so on and so forth. But again, it's not your responsibility to actually file their financial disclosure statement. So that being said, that's the end of my presentation, and I know we have quite a few questions. So we will stay on to the very end to answer all the questions. But at this point in time, I'll have Chris or Pat, if she's still on, give out the third keyword.
The third keyword, everybody, is Chicago, as in the city and Broadway play. Chicago. I just want to, before Mark gets into the questions, I just want to add that the deadlines have been extended. I had a chance to speak with the director, Tom Neff, before he left for a couple weeks. Here's how it's shaking out right now. We anticipate opening this up to the local government entity reps like municipal clerks and county clerks, et cetera, probably by sometime tomorrow. You guys will have until May 9th to complete your rosters. That's 3 full weeks. And then the local government officers will have until June 6th to comply with the filing deadline. So that's pretty much another month from the point that the rosters are created. And the local finance notice, we're trying to get finalized to go out tonight or tomorrow morning, and you'll have some more of that information in the local finance notice.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so let's go through the questions that have come up. Okay, so next question. I think this was from before at the end, but I'll just read it out. So it's to follow up on a prior question, if an LGO in 2014 has 3 different positions and in 2015 has 1, I understand we should not disable the individual. But what will we do to manage the roster to let the viewing public know the LGO is not filed for a position he or she abandoned rather than simply failing to file? We are working on an update to the system. It's not available just yet. It will be available at some point in time where the user, let's say the public user, will be able to view everybody that's on your roster who needs to file, okay? And then they'll be able to determine who hasn't filed and who has filed. Right now on the public site, it only lists those who have filed, but at some point in time, we will give the public the ability to actually view the entire roster that you created and see who has it and who has filed. At that point in time, that's why I said use the terms, right? So if somebody doesn't have to file for a position that they held in 2014 but due in 2015, that's kind of where the term, using the terms come into play. Okay, next question. I have filed for the Broadway Valley Sewage Authority, which is an autonomous authority. Will I still be filing for our commissioners, or will they file under their respective municipality? Again, if that sewage authority falls underneath the municipality, or I guess what Chris said earlier, if the commissioners on that sewage authority have been appointed by your governing body, then I believe it's going to be your responsibility to add them to your roster. So again, that's different, then Chris can jump in, but I think that's what he said earlier. It says we make all board commission members file whether they are required or not. Will that be a problem? It's not.
Mark, can you read that back?
Yeah, it says we make all board/commission members file whether they are required or not. Will that be a problem?
Yes. It's a problem from the sense that you're requiring people who aren't technically local government officers to comply with the filing requirements. I mean, is there a penalty for doing that? No, but what happens, and we realized this last year pretty quickly, now that the forms are available online, people who don't have to file these get very upset and cranky when they realize that they're filing something that they're not statutorily obligated to file, and then that information is online and available to the public. So at numerous presentations that I've given concerning this online system, I've very strongly encouraged the local government entities to really try hard to clean up your rosters. Number one, it'll be more effective and efficient for you moving forward year to year. Number two, it will eliminate baseless complaints, because if you're sweeping into this, your principal clerk typist or a human resources clerk or a police records clerk, and they don't really have to file, and let's say they're on your roster and they don't file, there's a potential that somebody will file an ethics complaint against that person when at the end of the day they're not obligated to file in the first place, and it was just a decision that was made in-house to sweep everybody into this. So it's just, we don't vet these. We don't like go into your roster and double check to make sure you're applying the statute the way it was intended. It's not, because number one, it's not easy. We know it's not easy, and that's why Mark mentioned earlier, you really need to work with your labor council and municipal council. I would suggest that you start with the low-hanging fruit. We know your elected officials, your planning boards, your zoning board, your administrator manager. We know certain people have to file. You start there. And then you branch out to the other boards and commissions, and you start asking yourself the questions that you need to ask. And the number one question I would ask is, are these people within the intent of the statute? And then if you have further questions, call up the labor lawyer and ask them to apply the analysis that's required, which is the PERC analysis, whether a person is a managerial executive or confidential assistant, confidential employee, or one of the other standards in the statute. And if you can't get the help of your attorneys, because I know that it's been relayed to me by many clerks that they do ask and sometimes they just don't get the help, then simply document that you asked for the help and make a decision on your part whether to include the person or not on the roster. But again, remembering that we're encouraging you to not sweep everybody into this. So I would say it's probably better in a truly great case to not have that person on the roster if you can't get some help from your solicitor.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Okay, some other questions here. Next question, can the LGO use a personal email address, or does it have to be an assigned municipal address? No, it does not have to be assigned municipal address. They can use their personal email address to register. Again, my recommendation is that, especially if their account encompasses multiple organizations, it might be prudent for them to use their personal email address, so it's something that they remember. If they had a municipal address, email address that they used to create their account, and then next year they're no longer associated with that municipality, but they're still associated, let's say, with the county or an authority, and they're still using that municipal address, it might not hold right with them. So again, they could use a personal email address if they want. Again, for the email addresses, we're really just using that as a username to log into the system. So again, whatever they want to do, they can utilize, but it has to be, a valid address. Next question. I have been asked to enter one of the LGOs exactly. They work for several municipalities as first name, last name, comma, Esquire. Should the last name be entered under the last name field as last name, comma, Esquire, or suffix field? I did not see a suffix field on the setup screen, only personal information screen. Very good question, Amy. I do know, let me just minimize this here real quick. When we do add the LGO, I don't think we had, let me just take a look here with the setup. Yeah, we did not have a suffix screen or field. It's something we could look at possibly adding in the future. So right now I would probably, if they want to have Esquire at the end of their last name, I would put in their last name, comma, Esquire. But just remember, it's going to be, you have to give them exactly how you enter it. So if it's last name, comma, ESQ period, when they go to register, it's going to have to be exactly put in that exact way. If they put in last name space ESQ period, it's probably going to default and say it's not a valid, name, or it's not going to match up. So just make sure if you're doing it that way, you give it to them exactly. And that's probably why you might want to just print out the screen and hand them a printout so they know exactly how you entered that in. But I will list that as an enhancement of maybe possibly add in that field, the suffix field, to to the system for future use for that very thing. Okay, next question. Will the LGO's personal information be saved from year to year in order not to retype each year? If you're talking about the financial disclosure information that they've entered, yes. The whole purpose of the system is that FDS data that they've entered in for the first year will be retained for next year, and then when they go to submit for next year, they will just they'll have to update that information. So each screen will have the information that was saved from the prior year, and they'll just accordingly make any changes. It's possible that none of the information changed and it stays the same. It'll make it easier for them. They can just kind of go through the whole form real quick. But if anything has changed, at that point in time, they'll be able to make changes and edits, and then submit their up-to-date current information. Okay. Next question. Municipal clerk should note the certification on the last page and not file for others. Municipal clerk should note the certification on the last page and not file for others. I guess, okay, Carol has left, but I guess she was saying maybe not to file for the LGOs, because looking at the certification and so on and so forth, that you point the LGOs to that certification. Next question, do I need to do anything different as a community college? Not sure, Sally. If you've done this in the past, I would say, except utilizing the new system, I would say from your roster standpoint, I don't think so. But Chris, I don't know. There's nothing new from the responsibilities that they've had in the past to this year, correct?
No, but one thing I've noticed is in sending out the communications to the presidents of the colleges, and that's because that's the contact information we have. Some of the college presidents have assigned this to a staff person to do, and it may not be the same person who's been doing this in the past. So based on what I can tell, there are going to be numerous people from the colleges doing this for the first time. But we've changed nothing other than the new system, but we've changed nothing like from a policy perspective. Colleges still need to have their local government officers file, and they still have the same responsibility as the towns and counties to figure out who is a local government officer. And they'll have access to the same local finance notices and FAQ and instructions and all that.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Okay, next question. It says, do I need to do, oh, no, we just answered that one. Okay. How do we send instructions to the LGOs? You don't have to necessarily send instructions to the LGOs. Once the live site is live, there'll be links on the live site that the LGOs can go to and find that information. So again, you don't have to physically send any instructions to them. You could just direct them to the URL of the live site, and they'll be able to get their information from there.
One thing one of the other towns had mentioned in one of the past presentations, or it might have been one of the programs where we did something in person, is that if you have a municipal website or a county website or what have you, and most of you do, is to provide a link to our website where all this information is going to be viewable from, and just refer your LGOs to that particular page. And it could be right on your home page, or it could be on an intranet if you're a bigger organization and you have like an employee intranet. But I mean, you could just set it up how you want to do it internally.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Next question says, are they financial disclosure filings still for the year prior? Not really sure, Donna, what you're asking. I mean, if you're asking if there's still financial disclosure filings for last year available, I would say yes. I believe there's a site that you can actually pull that information up today. But if that's not the question, if you want to just type the question again and rephrase it, that would be fine.
She may be asking about what information is included. So like as Mark has mentioned before, look at this like your tax return. You're filing your FDS in 2014, but the information runs from January 1, 2013 through December 31st of 2013. So if I'm an LGO in a town and I'm doing this in the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks from now, and I bought a house 2 days ago, that information is not required, or sources of income, or whatever the other requests are on the form, because it's based on a different calendar year.
Okay, good, thanks. Yeah, that's maybe what she was referring to, Chris. Thank you. Okay, next question. When can we start entering LGO information? Again, once you get that username and password from the DTA, you'll be able to actually start entering your information at that point in time. And again, I guess we're expecting that within the next day or two. Next question. What if a member serves on a town committee and a county committee? They will get two separate PIN numbers, one from the town committee and one from the county committee. They will associate both PIN numbers with their account. And again, if they associate both PIN numbers at the same time, they'll only have to file their financial disclosure statement one time. If they do it at separate times, then possibly they might have to do it twice in the submission of their financial disclosure statement. But again, if they're all associated with their account at the same time before they file, then they can only have to file one time.
And I just want to, I'd just like to underscore for everybody, you do not have to worry about the PIN numbers that are issued by other local government entities. The only PIN number you need to be concerned about is the PIN number that gets generated when you create your own roster. So you could completely ignore the other PIN numbers.
Okay, good, thanks. Next question. When I send out the PIN numbers to the individuals, can I mail to the department in a blast email? I would not recommend you sending everybody's username and PIN numbers out. Again, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's totally confidential information, but it is really confidential to that LGO. I don't know if you want that information kind of floating out there that everybody can see everybody else's PIN number. Not to say, you know, somebody would file or try to create an account under somebody else's PIN number or whatever, but I would recommend that you do it on an individual by individual basis, just, you know, to kind of keep it as confidential as, you know, possible. But I mean, again, you're the one responsible for communicating that information. It'll be totally up to you on how you want to, you know, disperse that information. Will they still have the ability to file after the deadline? Yes. The system doesn't shut down at the deadline time. LGOs will have the ability to file after the deadline. It is their responsibility to file by the deadline. But yeah, by all means, they could file after, but they have to be aware that as soon as they file that FES, it does get date and time stamp of exactly when they filed. So, you know, if somebody wanted to file an ethics complaint against them because they filed late, again, that information will be available, you know, of when they actually, you know, the date and time that they filed. But yes, they'll be able to file after the deadline. Okay, next question. It says, Manalapan appoints 2 commissioners to the Western Monmouth Utilities Authority, which is a separate entity. We have never had them file with us before. Are you saying that we have to now? Yes, Regina, if the township appoints the commissioners to the Utilities Authority, then those commissioners have to appear on your roster, and you will be responsible to give them their PIN number and their information once you register them on that roster. Next question. Does an executive director and an authority engineer for a sewage authority need to file an FES? Again, I would say you need to look at the publications that are out there to determine who needs and who doesn't need to file. Speak to your labor counsel or your counsel for your organization. Also, look at your roster from last year, see if that person had to file or not. That's a good starting point, but you have to kind of refer to the publications that are out there on who and who does not have to file. It says, I think people are going to have issues using their personal email addresses and having it as public information. Colleen, their email addresses will not be public information. Right now, their email address is a username to access the system. It's like their username if they were accessing their bank account, okay? It's not, you know, right now I believe it's not available. It's not going to be anywhere on the site where the public can see it, okay? So again, it is their, you know, username as part of their credentials in order to log into the system. So it should not be an issue. After I complete the roster, do I then proceed to notify each LGO of their PIN number and instructions? Yes. I mean, you could do that. I mean, I don't know how many people are on your roster, Paula, but, you know, if you have a roster of, you know, 20 or 30 people, then you might just want to put your whole roster together and then notify all your individuals. If you're managing a roster of several hundred, okay, you might want to, you know, do your first, let's say 25 today, notify that 25, do your next 25 tomorrow, notify that 25. Again, it's up to you what makes sense or what's easier for you to notify all those LGOs. But, you know, kind of the quicker that you notify them, the quicker that the LGO will be able to actually go in and file their financial disclosure. Next question. If this goes live tomorrow to municipal clerks, will we receive PIN numbers by tomorrow morning? Again, I don't know exactly when the information is going to be sent out to you exactly, but yes, you know, once you get that information, the URL, the PIN number, the username, you'll be able to actually start go into the system and start managing or updating your roster.
The local finance notice will probably go out this evening or very first thing in the morning. And then following that, you'll be receiving the email with the information you need to log in. And the local finance notice states that if you don't receive that by this Friday at the end of the day, to call the number that we provide, because that probably means that we have the wrong email address or something. But local finance will go out first, and then the expectation is that everybody will read it, and then you should be checking your inbox for the login and the password.
Good. Thanks, Chris. Next question. Any suggestions on how to relay each person's PIN number to him or her? Again, you could do it, like I said, once you create that LGO, we do have a print button at the bottom of the screen where you can print out a copy of that screen with their information on it. You can hand it to them. You can email it to them. That's up to you. You know, it's going to be what makes sense for you. What's the easiest way you get that information to them? So, you know, again, each organization is different on how they're going to communicate that, but, you know, just some way, somehow, you know, you're going to need to get that information to them. Okay, it says, what if someone has already filed and has handed in an electronic receipt? Can they file again? I'm not sure, Joanne, what you mean handed in an electronic receipt. If you're talking about a receipt for this year, for 2014, there's no way for them to have filed for 2014 yet. If it was for last year they gave you a receipt, well then that's for last year's filing. But I mean, if that's not the question you were asking, then if you could just, if you're still on, you could just ask the question or rephrase it again, that'd be great.
If you have any local government officers who somehow filed for what they believed was 2014, either they had an older paper form or they had the Adobe document from last year, that's not going to count. They need to file online once the system goes live.
Okay. Next question. Can you send us a link with the required positions that need to file? Again, I don't know if there's a specific link. If you go out to the DCA site, that's one area where you can find the information. If you go to the, like I said, if you're a municipal clerk and you go to the municipal clerk's site under desk reference, there is a section at the bottom. I don't remember it offhand, but you know, you can go there. And Lizette, if you have my, you know, again, you'll get a follow-up email for this session, or you have my email address. If you send me an email, I can direct you to the municipal clerk site where some of that information is. I do have that. I'm not on my computer right now. I'm in our conference room, so I don't have it handy. But if you send me an email, then I can actually forward you that link.
The local finance notice that'll be available either tonight or tomorrow morning has that information.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Okay, next question. What is the penalty if an LGO, if they refuse to file? Well, I know Chris's response is, you know, an ethics complaint could be lodged. They can end up in the paper. You mean, it's, you know, Chris, if you want to add on to that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, again, number one, it's not your job as local government entity reps to file for them, to make sure they file. But to the extent that any local government officer refuses to file or negligently does not file, they subject themselves basically to public scrutiny There are gadflies, there are newspaper reporters, there are political enemies, etc., who very frequently and regularly look at this information and use it for whatever purpose. And the number one type of complaint the local finance board receives from year to year is complaints based on not filing a financial disclosure statement. It's certainly not a good feeling when one has an ethics complaint filed against them. And ultimately, if there's a finding of guilt, there's a fine, and ultimately that person has to file. I mean, that's the bottom line. This year with this new system, because of the program, it will give us the opportunity at some point along the way, probably over the summer, early summer, to find out who did not, with a click of the button, to print a report to tell us who did not file, who was on a roster. From that report, we can then, as an agency, very efficiently communicate with those individuals, give them a warning, or at some point a violation notice, and call them to come before the local finance board. The system makes it that much more efficient for us to do.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, next question, I might refer to this to you as well, Chris, and it goes back to this Western Monmouth, I guess, Sewage Authority. It says Western Monmouth is a regional authority. So are the commissioners who are appointed by their respective towns on the town roster or on the authority's roster?
If it's a regional authority, they should be getting 2 separate PIN numbers. The regional authority is considered a separate local government entity. So that should, that will be a separate roster that gets created by that authority.
Okay. So just so I'm aware, so if they're a commissioner appointed by the town's going to put them on their roster, and also the authority will put them on their roster as a commissioner as well too?
No, if it's a regional authority, it's a separate. It's considered to have a separate status. So at that point, the fact that the governing body is designating or appointing somebody to be that agent, to be that person's representative on the regional authority representing that town, it's still a regional authority. The local authority is considered part of the local family. So township of, Springfield has a Springfield MUA. We consider, and the statutes consider that MUA as part of the local, of the Springfield Township local government family. The regional authority would stand on its own 2 legs as a separate governing body. Okay, good. Okay, so regional is its own entity, but if it's a municipal authority, it falls under the municipality.
Okay, it says, as a local sewage authority, we have always had our board members do FDSs. Do I understand that the towns that have appointed them will also list them as members of our authority? Yes. Yeah, so if they're a municipal authority, they will go on the municipal roster. Let's see here. Will the PIN number and the login be emailed to the county clerk or to the representative that will be creating the roster? I believe that will be emailed to the county clerk, whoever is on file. Correct, Chris?
Yeah, some of the county clerks asked us to use very particular email addresses for this contact. Other groups like joint insurance funds, everybody that has a role in this will get an email at some point. The first set of emails that are going out are towns, counties, and county colleges, followed by the regional authorities, joint meetings, and joint insurance funds.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so we've gotten to all the questions that have been asked. I will stay on a few more minutes if anybody has any late questions that come up, but I want to just thank everybody for joining us today. As I had mentioned, this session is being recorded. We will be posting this on a site. I do know that we're going to be sending out a link. Probably it might go out with the notices that are going out either later today or tomorrow with that link. So if you want to go back, if you have yourself or anybody else within your organization wants to review this session or any of the previous 8 sessions, feel free to take a look at them at any point in time. And again, I just want to thank you for joining us today. So I have another question that just came in real quick. If a member to the Housing Authority is appointed, will that member be part of the town's roster or the Housing Authority's roster? Again, if it's a municipal authority, okay, if it's the, Springfield Housing Authority, then it would be on the municipal roster, okay? If it's a regional authority, then the regional is its own entity, and they would be on that regional's roster. But if it's a municipal housing authority, then they will go on the municipal roster. Okay, next question. I am a municipal clerk. My deputy attended a different webinar last week. She said clerks will need 2 separate email addresses for the new FDS process. I don't remember hearing that on the call. Can you elaborate? Yes, Mary. Basically, the email address that's going to be sent to you to actually go in and manage your rosters is just that. It's used to set up and manage your rosters. Now, you as a municipal clerk will have to file an FDS, okay? You will have to use a different email address in order to file that financial disclosure statement. So you can either use your own personal email address, you can ask the township to issue a different email address just for that filing. I'm surprised the question didn't come up, but I'll mention it since it kind of relates to email addresses. Some of the questions that came up last week were about, well, some of my older members, that are on certain boards or commissions or whatever, don't use email or don't have an email address. Again, what we would recommend is that the township issue them an email address if possible. If not, there are several services out there that they can get a free email address from. So it could be, Gmail, Yahoo, Outlook.com. You can, just set up an email address just for your financial disclosure filing and just utilize that one. But yes, the email address that's given to you or sent to you to actually log in and manage your rosters will need to be different than the one you use to file your FDS for. Okay, it says the link to our website, will that allow your LGOs and the public to find the info they need? The link to use on our site, will that allow the LGOs and the public to find the information they need? Yes, Dale, you can take the links that are going to be provided to you and put them on your township site, and they will just redirect out to the sites that I'm showing you today in our training. Obviously, these are the training sites, but they'll be directed basically to the live site. It's just a little bit different URL, and once they click on that link, they'll just be taken right to the site. Even though it's not, you're not hosting the website, it's just a link, showing them or directing them to that external site. Okay, it says next question. As a regional sewage authority, should we provide the PIN numbers to the 11 local municipal clerks so they can link the separate PINs together for the individual filers? Joanne, I would say you should be in touch with your members that you set up on your roster and communicate that information to them directly. It'll be up to the municipal clerks to send those LGOs their PIN numbers. Again, it's the LGO who has to obtain the different PIN numbers. It's not going to be the municipal clerk who's doing the linking of the PIN numbers. It's going to be the LGO who links their PIN numbers together. So that LGO should get their individual PIN numbers from each organization that they're associated with. Next question. If I use my personal email address to file my FDS, will any government communication be sent to that address? As of right now, no. Again, that email address is just being used to use as a username to log into the system. Okay, those are the questions up to this point. Again, if anybody has any last minute questions, but I'll answer them. It's almost 12 o'clock, so I'll stay on another 4 minutes to 12 o'clock if anybody has any last minute questions. And again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us in today's session. So. One last question that came in. It said only 3 keywords were given, correct? Yes, there were only 3 keywords given for today's session, one in the beginning, one in the middle, and one towards the end of when I was finishing up the presentation, yes. Next question, how do we file for the CEUs? There is a form that you can download off the DCA site under local, I believe it's under the local government services section for independent training, I believe it is. When you follow that form, you will want to include your keywords on that form, and then that form gets submitted to Dan Kaminsky at the DCA. And at that point in time, once you review the form and the keywords, and if everything is okay and approved, then your CEUs will be issued at that point in time. Okay, everybody, it's around 12 o'clock. I'm going to be ending this webinar. Again, thanks everybody for joining us today. And again, those webinars will be available online. You will be receiving a link, so if you want to review them again, feel free to go through them, or have any of your staff who might be doing this to review them as well too. So thank you, and have a great